I'll use this mic. I like this mic better anyway. What good is it if you say you have faith, but do not have works? I served a congregation that had progressive values and cared a lot about their neighbors and prided themselves in being welcoming. There are a lot of congregations who fit this bill, and I'm speaking of one of many that I have served. And I remember a time where we had someone in worship who was about 25 years old, and this person wore jean shorts and a colorful short-sleeve shirt and a hat. And that's what they wore to worship. And they came for several weeks in outfits like this. And this bothered people in the congregation. Maybe you can guess why. The people in this congregation had a sense that it's disrespectful to wear hats in the sanctuary. That's what they had been taught growing up, and that is what they tried to teach their children. But this person, young adults, had not been taught that growing up and didn't know that they were doing anything offensive. And so people started to talk to this person, telling them that they should dress differently in worship. And they found that a little off-putting. They found that a little bit strange, like, you say that you want to have people of my generation here, but then when we come with our full selves and dressed the way that we like to be dressed, you don't like it, and you want us to abide by your cultural norms or your expectations of what is appropriate. I also think of other things that people can find inappropriate in terms of dress. Sometimes people don't like people with lots of tattoos or lots of piercings, or I think about a congregation where I was where people would grumble if the high school girls would wear short skirts. Various ideas of what is appropriate and what is the cultural norm here, and a sense that we need to enforce that cultural norm on other people. I love the book of James. It might seem a little bit un-Lutheran of me, but my Lutheran grandfather, I have a seminary paper from him that he wrote about how James got it right and that maybe Martin Luther needed to lighten up a little bit. But I think the two can actually fit together very nicely. I don't think they have to conflict with each other. I love this passage in James, where James talks about something that's happening in the worship services that he's seeing. People are coming in a variety of different dresses. Some of them are wearing gold rings and fine clothes, and others are coming in dirty clothes. And maybe it's people who don't have gold rings and fine clothes. He identifies these with the poor. But it also might be a cultural difference. It might not just be that they just don't have enough money to buy fine clothes. It might also be that that's actually culturally appropriate, the way they're dressed. And they're not trying to dress like us. It's not like they're failing at dressing like the rich. Maybe that's just a different culture. And maybe they aren't trying to be like us, and what they're dressed in is what's appropriate for them. James calls out the people. He calls them out for, what does he say? Favoritism, acts of favoritism, for treating these people differently based on how they appear. And I think about my congregation, and one of the congregation I mentioned earlier, and the way that they did not treat this person with favoritism. In fact, potentially treated them with some discrimination, telling them they actually needed to dress differently in order to be welcome and accepted here. And it calls to mind to me, this question of, should others have to follow the cultural norms that I value? Should others have to follow the rules of what I think is appropriate? What good is it if you say you have faith, but do not have works? What good is it if we have these values of inclusion if we don't always live them out? I talked to the congregation member who was trying to correct the clothing of this other person. I talked to them about the conflict of these values, their values of taking the hat off to show respect and their value of inclusiveness. And I tried to open up their conversation and their way of thinking for them to think about which of these things is more important to you. And what I found was a lot of resistance from this congregation member. It was really, really upsetting to them to think that maybe they had done something wrong, that maybe what they had said on multiple occasions to this person, maybe that actually went against their value of inclusion. This person considered themselves very inclusive, very welcoming, very friendly. And so it was very threatening to them to think that maybe what they had done didn't live up to those values that they had and didn't live up to that self-image. There's a phrase that rings in my head in a different situation I was in, also a church situation, where people were talking about inclusion and the way that we sometimes have these norms that exclude people. And someone in that setting said, "Oh, well, I would never forgive myself if this thing I did made them feel excluded." And that has rung in my ears. I would never forgive myself if the thing that I did excluded someone. That's really concerning to me. Not just the idea of never forgiving, but if we can't acknowledge when we have fallen short or when we have failed at living up to our values, if we're so insecure about ourselves and our own goodness that when someone points out, hey, you're not being welcoming, we actually can't hear it because we consider ourselves welcoming people. We have to be able to have been wrong. We have to be able to have sinned. We have to be able to change our mind. Jesus does something similar to what James talks about in the gospel reading today. Jesus is greeted with someone who is asking to partake in what he has to offer. If we go back to our metaphor of the feast, healing is on the table, right? Jesus offers healing. That's part of the feast that Jesus invites us to. And he actually acts. He doesn't act of favoritism. Jesus does. In this passage, he says, actually, we need to let the children be fed first, meaning the children of Israel, the people I have come to serve. I need to serve them first. They need healing first. They should be first in line at the feast. And it's not fair to take the dish that is for them and give it to the dogs, give it to the outsiders. And this woman is not fazed. She's probably faced a lot of discrimination in her life, and she has a daughter who needs healing, and it really doesn't matter what he says to her. She needs to get this for her daughter. She stands up for herself, and she points out that she's still part of God's creation. Sure, I'm not a child of Israel, but God even provides for those who are not. Even the dogs eat the crumbs of the table. I still deserve healing. I still deserve to eat. I belong here. And Jesus changes his mind. He is impressed, and he offers her healing first before he continues the feast that he was about to have with his disciples, the feast of teaching and eating and sharing. He heals her first. He lets someone point out to him when he is doing an act of favoritism, and he repents. He changes his ways. Because what good is it if you say you have faith but have no works? What good is it if we say we are welcoming, but then when someone points out when we're not, we're too defensive to actually change? What good is it? Jesus heals the woman's daughter, but I think he also is healed. He is changed by the experience. And by being healed, he's able to heal. The cycle continues. We are healed and we heal. We are healed and we heal. It's a back and forth. And this is what happens at this feast, this banquet that we share together. In order for that healing to be on the menu, think about racism. In order for healing from racism to be on the menu of this feast we share together, we have to admit that there is racism, that we are racist. We have to be able to admit our own failings so that we can repent and live up to our values, so that healing can actually be possible and that healing can remain on this menu. The good news of all of these readings is that God always offers us another chance. I would never forgive myself if this. God does not share that viewpoint. God has no sense of us that is dependent on us having been good in the past. God's love for us and the divine spark within us is not dependent on whether we have done good in the past. That divine spark is there no matter what. So we're free to not have to worry about if we've been good enough. We're free to not have to worry about if our own self-image of ourselves is welcoming. If someone points out a way that we've been not welcoming and can be more welcoming, we're free to just change that. We don't have to worry. God's love for us and our sense of place in this kingdom is not determined by anything that we have done. We are free to have a new day. We are free to change. We will move in now to our time of contemplation. We will have a minute of silence that will begin with the ringing of chimes and also end with the ringing of chimes. I invite you to meditate or to engage in silent prayer or reflection during this time.